What's up, guys, and welcome to my review of the latest film out of A24, Death of a Unicorn. The premise here is you have a father and daughter played by Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega who, en route to a weekend work retreat, strike an animal with their car that turns out to be a unicorn, and then they soon discover that this unicorn's blood and horn contain magical healing powers. And being that Paul Rudd's boss is a big pharmaceutical head, when he discovers what they've done, he realizes he can use these resources from the unicorn to not only cure his own illness, but fill his pockets by selling this to his rich friends. But it turns out this unicorn has a mom and dad, and they aren't too receptive to one of their own being killed and drained of its resources. So they decide to storm the home and kill anything and everything that gets in their way in order to get their baby back. I have been looking forward to this movie for quite some time. The first details I heard about it was that it was a horror comedy starring Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega, and it was a Jurassic Park kind of movie but with unicorns instead of dinosaurs. And those details were enough to immediately get me hooked. I didn't need to see anything else. I knew for sure I was going to be there day one. So yes, I was very hyped for this film, and with that comes big expectations. But did it live up to those expectations, or did it end up being a disappointment of mythical proportions? Let's get into that. But first, as always, I'd like to ask that while you're here, go ahead and give the video a like and subscribe to the channel as well. Also, get down in the comments below and tell me all your thoughts and opinions on Death of a Unicorn. If you've already seen it, what did you think about it? If you haven't, are you going to be checking it out? Are you excited for it? I'd love to read all your guys' thoughts. Now let's get on with the review. So starting with the positives, and I would say that Jurassic Park with unicorns is a great way to describe this film, and it is at its best when it feels like that. These aren't your typical My Little Pony unicorns. They are beastly and monstrous, and when they get a hold of someone, they tear them to shreds, much like a dinosaur would. But also in the scenes where the humans are having to sneak around and stay out of the unicorn sight, it felt like those moments were pulled right out of those first couple Jurassic Park films. And speaking of when they do get a hold of someone, at first the kills in this movie had me a little nervous because the first couple are sort of hidden from us, like only showing the shadowy silhouette of a kill, or just people getting yanked into dark forests. So at first I was kind of like, come on, this is an R-rated movie, you gotta give us more than that. But once the ball got rolling and the kills started happening more frequently, they were absolutely fucking these people up, and so any nervousness that I had was immediately washed away, and they definitely ended up earning their R rating. And another thing on that is typically I'm a real stickler for CGI blood and gore. I like to keep things as practical as possible and as often as we possibly can. But while I was watching this movie, there was never really a moment where I found it distracting or that it was taking me out of the moment. So this is a rare time of a movie implementing CGI blood and gore that actually didn't bother me. This film has a really robust cast with some very notable names. I already mentioned Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega, but you also have Téa Leoni and Richard E. Grant and Anthony Carrigan in here, and they all work really well off each other. But in my opinion, no one stood out in this film more than Will Poulter. Out of all the characters, he was by far the one I enjoyed the most, and that's not me slandering any of the other characters in this film. It's just more of a testament to how much I enjoyed him. He plays the spoiled rich kid's son of Richard E. Grant's character, and he gives this very caricature type over-the-top goofy performance that I really enjoyed and found to be the most hilarious aspect of the movie. Of course, he's shown he can do comedy before. I mean, he kind of burst onto the scene all the way back in 2014 with We're the Millers, so I shouldn't be too surprised by it. But with heavy hitters like Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega, I just didn't have him being the shining star of the bunch, but he was an absolute scene stealer. Moving on to the mix now, and really the only thing I have here all pertains to Jenna Ortega. Now, don't get me wrong, she's an actress that I've really enjoyed ever since I was first introduced to her with Scream 5 and X, and I've enjoyed everything she's done since then. Even if I didn't like the specific movie she was in, I never felt like she was the problem. And for the record, that is still the case here. I still think she gives a solid performance in this film. But this was the first time that I think I felt Jenna Ortega fatigue. It's starting to feel like she's becoming a victim of typecasting. She gets cast as a lot of these characters that I feel only require her to give slightly different versions of the same performance. And after that happens so many times, it becomes hard to be impressed with the performance, and you just start to think, yeah, she did the Jenna Ortega thing. And I know she's far too talented of an actress to get that reputation. So moving forward, I would like to see her get the chance to branch out and kind of spread her wings, because being that this was the first time I experienced this kind of fatigue, I don't want the next time I see her to be even worse, because I would like for her to continue to be an actress that I'm excited to see, not one that I'm exhausted with. But I'm not all the way there yet, so in a vacuum, this is still a really solid performance out of her, and that's why it's going in the mixed for me. Getting into the negatives now, and by far what disappointed me the most about Death of a Unicorn is just how much of the comedy didn't work for me. Going in, my expectations were that I was going to be laughing my ass off from beginning to end, because that's how this film was advertised. But if it wasn't for Will Poulter and Anthony Carrigan, this movie would have completely bombed on the comedic side of things for me. They were the only two making me consistently laugh, and that's a real shame because you can clearly see there's a lot of chemistry chemistry amongst the cast here. Like I said, they all work really well off of each other, but there were so many moments where a joke would come and go and it wouldn't even get a smile out of me. And I know comedy is subjective, so you could take this critique with a grain of salt. And when you see it, if the comedy lands, you'll have a completely different experience. But for me, the success rate of the jokes in this movie were way lower than I expected them to be. And how the hell do you have Paul Rudd in your movie and manage to make him one of the least funny characters in the movie? This man has been in some of the most notable comedies of the last quarter century, and they give him absolutely nothing to work with in this movie. He's pretty much just a sad dad the entire movie, and they completely wasted him, in my opinion. Which brings me to my next point, which is about this subplot going on between Paul Rudd and Jenna Ortega, and it's all about how their relationship has become a bit estranged since the passing of his wife and her mother, and they never really do enough with it, in my opinion, to justify its inclusion. It doesn't really become a focus until the third act of the movie, but by that point, we haven't really gotten enough of it for me to be emotionally invested in, especially amongst all the chaos that is taking place around it. And so for me, tonally, all the moments dealing with that storyline felt out of place, and in my opinion, could have just been cut out altogether, and maybe more focus and energy could have been put towards the comedic execution, which is where I feel this film needed the most support. So there you guys have it. Those are my thoughts on Death of a Unicorn. Unfortunately, I think this film falls victim to my super high expectations that I had placed on it. I really thought this movie was going to end up being a top 10 of the year for me, and it just didn't end up being that. However, when it was the Jurassic Park with unicorns movie I hoped for, I had a lot of fun with it. And so despite not being as funny as I thought it would be and some misplaced emotional moments, it was still a very enjoyable experience for the most part. As it pertains to the score, I'm giving Death of a Unicorn a 7 out of 10. It's kind of on the fringe of whether I would recommend you go check this out in a theater or just wait for it to be on a streaming service, because if the comedy lands for you better than it did for me, you may deem this worthy of going and spending the money to check it out in a theater. But simply based off the experience I had with it, I have to recommend you wait and stream it once it's available. It ended up being a movie that I really wanted to love, but only ended up liking. But of course, let me know what you guys think about Death of a Unicorn down in the comments below. If you've already seen it, what'd you think about it? If you haven't, are you excited to check it out? Are you going to be checking it out at all? I'd love to read all your guys' thoughts. Also, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel as well for more movie reviews, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.